Hi guys, welcome to the next lesson. As ever, if you want to pause the video here and write down the do now questions, I'll go over the answers. The questions are: number 1, what are compounds? What are compounds? 2, what is the dot structure we used to write out some reactions called? What is the dot structure we use to write out some reactions called? What is sodium chloride, more commonly known as? What is sodium chloride, more commonly known as? And I've given you the NaCl, sodium chloride. That's the chemical formula. So pause the video here, have an attempt, and we'll go over the answer. Okay, what are compounds? In simple terms, compounds can be described as substances that have two or more atoms bonded together. In simple terms, compounds can be described as substances that have two or more atoms bonded together. We looked at examples last lesson, and we looked at H2O, for example, where we had two hydrogen atoms bonded with one oxygen atom. That is an example of a compound. What is the dot structure we use to write out some reactions called? Well, that was the Lewis dot structure. We saw that in the last lesson. That allows us to draw chemical reactions without having to draw every single electron. So the Lewis dot structure is essentially the chemical symbol with dots representing how many valence electrons that element has. What is sodium chloride, more commonly known as? Well, it was table salt, or just salt. So we saw that reaction in the last lesson as well. How do we make that? But the sodium had 1 valence electron and chlorine has 7. So they quite easily react together. And when they do, they create salt. Okay, this lesson we're going to be looking at similar sort of stuff, but we're going to be adding some more terminology. One of the things that you may have heard of before, you may never have heard of it, that's fine, is ions, I-O-N-S, ions. An ion is an atom that has given up or gained electrons. So remember in the last lesson there was a plus and a minus sign, and I said not to worry about it. Well, we're going to be talking about that today in a lot more detail. Why do we see this plus and minus sign? What does that actually mean? So when an atom loses or gains an electron, more than what it should have usually, then it becomes what we call an ion. And I'll give us a proper definition of that in a minute, so don't worry too much. But you'll see the word ion quite a bit, and hopefully by the end of this lesson, you know what an ion is. So let's recap. In the last lesson, I showed you sodium reacting with chlorine to make sodium chloride. And it was fairly straightforward when we look at the valence electrons, with the red dot becoming part of chlorine. So the sodium is sharing its electron with chlorine, and chlorine is gaining that electron as well. What I said though was, what does this mean? Why is there a plus and why is there a minus? What's that got to do with? So why does sodium become positively charged? That's what the plus means, positive charge. And why does chlorine become negatively charged? So we're going to think about that today. So we're talking about charges. And remember, sodium gave up 1 electron and chlorine gained 1 electron. Now that may not make much sense. If you're giving something away, why is that positive? And if this is gaining something, why is it negative? But have a think in your head, what are they gaining and what are they losing? They're gaining and losing electrons. What kind of charge does an electron have again? If we think about it, protons have positive charge, neutrons have no charge, electrons have a negative charge. So if sodium is getting rid of a negatively charged electron, it now has more protons in the atom than electrons. The protons are positive, so it then becomes positively charged. Chlorine, on the other hand, takes on an additional electron, which is negatively charged. Now it has more negatively charged electrons than it does positively charged neutrons. So now it has a negative charge, a net negative charge. Okay, let's go over that in more detail. Look at what's happening to the electron in sodium. It is losing an electron and giving it to chlorine. what number is sodium on the periodic table? Let's look at this in more detail. So let's find sodium. It is number 11. Number 11 in the periodic table. So if sodium is number 11 on the periodic table, we know it must have 11 protons, 11 neutrons, and 11 electrons. That means it has 11 positive charges and 11 negative charges. When this happens, so sodium, Na, when it gets rid of that electron, it still has the same amount of protons, so it still has 11 positive charges, but it loses one electron, therefore now it only has 10 negative charges. So it is now more positively charged than it is negatively charged. It doesn't cancel out anymore. There's a disbalance or unbalance, I should say. There's more positive charges than negative charges. Therefore, we write it as Na+. It is positively charged. Okay? Chlorine. Let's look at chlorine, the other side of the equation. 17. Okay? If chlorine is number 17 on the periodic table, therefore, it must have 17 protons, 17 neutrons, and 17 electrons. That means it has 17 positive charges in the protons and 17 negative charges in the electrons. And we see it's gaining an extra electron from sodium. Therefore, it now has 17 positive charges. That hasn't changed, but has gained an extra electron. Therefore, it now has 18 negative charges. So the difference between 17 and 18 is 1, but that is enough to be negatively charged by 1. So we just write that as a minus sign here on chlorine. So there's one extra electron. Therefore, it is negatively charged. Okay, it's no longer balanced. So this is why we get the plus and the minus sign. Okay, if we look at fluorine, let's have a look here. Atoms, an atom or molecule with a net electric charge due to the loss or gain of one or more electrons is called an ion. So that definition is really, really important. Okay, so basically what we just discussed here, but they've just written it in a slightly different way, this example. So say we have fluorine here, okay, it needs to gain another electron. When it does gain that other electron, it is negatively charged by 1. So you could write that as 1 minus, but we just write minus because we just assume that's 1. If it gained more than 1, then it would be 2 minus. And we would see that, we'd write that as 2 minus. But I would like you to write down just now is an ion is an atom or molecule with a net electric charge due to the loss or gain of one or more electrons. Okay. Elements that lose or gain electrons, which are either positively or negatively charged, are called ions. So it doesn't matter if it's gained or lost an electron, they're both called ions. But being a negatively charged ion or a positively charged ion are two different things. Instead of saying a negatively charged ion or a positively charged ion, we shorten this to two names because that's quite a mouthful. Okay, if I just said, yep, sodium is a positively charged ion and chlorine is a negatively charged ion of chlorine, that's going to take up a lot of space if I'm writing that down in a sentence. So we have shortened that to two different words. And I'm hoping you've missed my memory aids from last year, swag and everything else. So I've got another one here. Positively charged ions are called cations or cations, depending how you want to pronounce it. Cations. So positively charged ions are called cations. So I couldn't resist if we're talking about cats. Cations or cations are positively charged. Cations are positively charged. So every time I think about it, if I get mixed up, cations are positively charged. Think of a cat having paws. Cats have paws. Cations are positively charged. Might be a bit of a stretch. I can hear your eye rolling from here, but I guarantee you'll not forget it if you remember this memory aid. Okay? Cations are the positively charged ions. Negatively charged ions are called anions. negatively charged ions are called anions. So I kind of think that sounds like onions a little bit. I mean, if you say it in your Aussie accent, it definitely does. Onions. So negatively charged ions are called anions. Okay. So again, nobody likes cutting onions. It hurts your eyes. It's a negative experience. Negatively charged ions are called anions. Okay. So a little recap from today. The plus and the minus sign on an element or an atom is related to either losing or gaining electrons. When an element loses or gains an electron and gets a net charge, it's either negative or positively charged, we call it an ion. An ion can be further split into the positive and negatively charged. Positively charged ions are called cations, and negatively charged ions are called anions. There's a lot of information today. Please log on to the Zoom lesson if you're watching this before the lesson and get involved in any questions you may have, and we'll be talking about this in more detail again. Okay, thank you guys. Hamish got another fun fact. A shrimp's heart is in its head. There you go. Thank you guys.